Hello, and apologies, we had some technical difficulties. I think we'll just start again and we'll catch up quickly. Very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. Welcome to Ready or Not, Important Dates for 3D Secure, the fourth in the webinar series hosted by Cardinal Commerce. I'm Paul Harrison, Head of Sales, Enablement and Business Development at Cardinal. I'm delighted to have a very special guest, Maggie Bodak, with us today, who is the Director of Business Strategy and Operations within the product team at Cardinal. Maggie, you're very welcome. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
And perhaps you might be able to tell us a little bit about yourself, in terms of what you do at work, that is.
Sure, thank you. So I'm Director of Business Strategy and Operations for our global product team. And at this moment in time, I do a plethora of things, but really I work with the card networks, talk about their program rules regarding 3DS 1.0.2 and the new upcoming EMV 3DS, whether that be version 2.1, 2.2, or advancing forward. And really, hone in on the key dates that are required, mandates that may be required in specific regions, and all other aspects having to do with the individual network support for EMV 3DS.
Okay, so you do quite a lot, and I think that confirms that you're probably the ideal guest for today's discussion. Because I think it's fair to say that in the world of 3D Secure, there's a lot going on at the moment, and it's both exciting but also potentially confusing. What with the new 3D Secure protocol having just come into effect, and then there's going to be updated versions in the near future. How networks manage the 3D Secure protocol timeline varies. It varies from region in some cases. And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, PSD2, which will finally come into effect at the end of December for all of Europe, with a couple of exceptions, such as the UK going into effect in March 2021. So I think merchants could be forgiven for really being quite, having a difficulty understanding what should they focus on, what's important to them, and what should they be doing. And of course, it all pertains to where are they doing business, where is their business acquired. So that's what we're going to help solve today. We're going to discuss and summarize how these different dates and deadlines are going to impact merchants and what they should do. Okay. So before we do proceed, you should notice a prompt, and this is for all the listeners, to just answer two quick questions in terms of where you're doing business. And that will be much appreciated. And then the second question.
Well, we're looking for those poll results first,
yes.
though. So can our participants fill out and check mark where they do business?
So we'll pause for just a moment and then we'll steam ahead. Okay, so awesome. Very much global. So we're seeing that merchants certainly operating in North America, and then, of course, in the other main regions, Asia, Europe, Latin America. And of course, this can be a mix of merchants who are doing business exclusively in one of these regions, or larger merchants who are operating across different regions.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's where it becomes particularly confusing, where merchants are having to deal with different deadlines depending on where they are operating, right?
Yeah, and that absolutely can be confusing.
Okay, so let's steam ahead. So I think before we take a look at dates in the future, perhaps, Maggie, we might be able to summarize some key events that have happened to date. What are the important things that, just to set set the scene that's happened in the world of 3D Secure?
Yeah, so I think this slide shows what's happened and what's progressed. It starts at October 2018, but really I just want to level set and, say we've known that the 2.1 spec has been out in public since really December 2017. So 2018 was really a gear up year for all of the vendors, right? They had to code to EMVCo spec. They needed to certify with EMVCo, and then they needed to work towards certification with each individual network that they would support. So in comes the activation dates by these networks and when they've actually allowed EMV3DS to be available on their platforms. So the first date, October 2018, we did have American Express launch globally for 2.1 for their SafeKey product. And around the same time, MasterCard also had Smart Authentication launch as well for their Identity Check solution, which Identity Check is their EMV3DS program name, whereas Secure Code was their 3DS 1.0.2 name. And the Smart Authentication allowed for the directory server to stand in and apply risk-based authentication to those transactions. At that time, the only market who was not allowed to opt out was the LAC market, but issuers also had the option to opt out of this service. And that really took us through 2019 when they expired those opt-outs. But in between that time frame, in April 2019, Discover, Diners, JCB launched globally. JCB is a little bit different because they do run on other networks, Rails sometimes. So
Right.
the U.S. market particularly isn't up and running yet with JCB EMV3DS, but other markets are. August 2019, Visa activated EMV3DS for Canada and LAC. So that was, hey, come on board. We want you guys to activate. They went ahead. Issuers are getting ready. They've loaded some bins in the system, and there's transactions that are processing in both Canada and LAC since that time frame. I did talk a little bit about the October 2019, where the opt-outs for the issuers who did not want to participate in Smart Authentication and have MasterCard stand in on their behalf, that really expired. So that was really a pivotal MasterCard launch at that point in time for October last year. It was, hey, we're available, Mr. Merchant. If you've done the integration work, if you're ready to enable EMV3DS,
we'll help support you.
You can really start sending those transactions down our rails. A little bit difficult for an issuer, though. If they have not enabled, then they don't have visibility into those transactions sometimes. So it's a two-way street. September 2019, so Carte Bancaire, or CB, in France enabled EMV3DS. This was in support of PSD2 and SCA requirements in Europe. So they came out as a new card network, quote unquote, to support their own directory server and their own EMV3DS program. And then there was a MasterCard 2019 global date where all acquirers, issuers, and merchants were to support EMV3DS as well. So that's our look back, really.
Yeah, and so obviously a lot has happened.
A lot has
happened already. Okay, so moving forward then, taking an overview, first of all, and obviously I think it might be worth us digging into each of these key milestones, but perhaps we can talk a little bit about what are the key events that we should anticipate this following 12 months or so.
Yeah, well, especially for our North American merchants and attendees on the line here, the big date for North America is August of 2020. So Visa is going to activate the U.S. market at this point in time. So, issuers and merchants, acquirers, gateways, if you support a sellable 3D Secure service, you really should be, up and running and starting to use EMV3DS come this August. The other big notation for this year is April of 2020. So Visa is also going to activate the AP and CEMEA markets.
Right.
So that's another market launch that's going to happen. And, with those two events happening in April and August, come August, Visa really will be globally available at that point in time.
Right. Okay.
And
Well,
then,
maybe we should dig in a little bit.
PSD2 stuff, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so maybe perhaps first we talk about this March 2020 deadline.
Yeah. So there is a March 2020 deadline for Europe. It's March 14th. This is requiring all issuers in Europe to support, and not just support, but also deploy EMV3DS version 2.1. So this is really in preparation for PSD2 and SCA. It's part of the migration plans that were submitted both to the EBA as well as UK finance authorities. We really want to make sure that issuers and merchants are showing progress to meet this extended deadline that's been given to the European market since September 14, 2019. And that's going to be the 2020 date in December that we're going to talk about here in a moment.
Okay. So there's a real incentive for merchants to start really consider adopting this if they haven't up till now.
Yeah, absolutely. Start using the new technology. There's lots of benefits that EMV3DS can give to the entire ecosystem.
And I think we'll make sure we touch on those the key benefits in a few moments. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then moving along to the following month, April. So what's happening then?
Yeah. So like I had mentioned, this is really the launch of Visa for EMV3DS 2.1 in the AP as well as the CEMEA regions. So, hey, if you're a merchant and you've implemented, the attempt server will be activated for you. This is an encouragement for issuers to support EMV3DS as well in these two regions, and just make sure that they have visibility and they're getting all of those added benefits as well.
Sure. And while obviously today we've mentioned PSD2 and we'll talk a little bit about that, of course there are other countries and regions that are mandated. And so, for example, within the APAC region, countries such as India or Malaysia, already there's different forms of treaty secure regulation in place.
Yeah. Australia and New Zealand as
absolutely.
well.
And sometimes they vary they're just specific to different networks, or they could be more pan-network. Yes, absolutely. And just for our listeners to know, information such as this can be accessed on the following website, which gives an overview of the different regional mandates and network mandates. And that's the address is demos.cardinalcommerce.com.
Yeah. Do make sure that you put an HTTPS with a colon and / in front of that, though.
Okay. So moving on, the U.S. you had mentioned, of course, that's when August 2020 things happen.
Yeah, this is a real big shift for the U.S. market. It's a non-regulated market. So, of course, it does not necessarily mean that you have to do EMV3D secure like other regions or like the European market. But the advantages that you get with, EMV3DS, it's the more data that you're sending now and starting to infiltrate and get into the issuer's systems, then, the better that can help the authorization system.
Yes.
We know that there's a, strong gap disparity between card present sales and card not present sales. And, we want to make sure that we're starting to close that gap and, hopefully EMV3DS and some benefits that it brings will help alleviate that problem in the future.
Yeah, I don't think we can underestimate that, just what you said, in the sense that it's not regulated in the U.S., but there's definitely a value, and that will really come into play with the new protocol.
Yeah.
And as you said, all that data, especially as merchants, there's so much of focus on trying to optimize approval rates. And this is one method that has been proven to really help.
Yeah.
So, okay, so that's interesting. So then September, we're getting close to the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So what is happening in September?
So September is a second European mandate for coming out of Visa. So, we have in March, we want issuers to support 2.1. September, we want those same issuers to now support 2.2. And if you're familiar at all with the specifications and the differences between 2.1 and 2.2, we know that the large exemption support is through the 2.2 version spec. So, that's the ability to, request or enable whitelisting, to apply a transaction risk analysis or TRA, either from an acquirer perspective or an issuer perspective. So, those are really going to come and play with that 2.2 spec. And this is, again, another point in the timeline to December and to March where, it's proving that everybody is making valid efforts and moving forward and getting ready for PSD2 SCA.
Right.
There's not going to be another extension. We were lucky that they gave us an additional 12 to 18 months when they did. So this is now time to bear down in the European market and really get EMV3DS into play. And really this ties with, another date I don't think we talk about, but there is an acquirer date from Visa, where acquirers must also support EMV3DS, both 2.1 and 2.2 versions. So, make sure that the merchants are shifting, make sure that they're using the new technology and being ready as possible.
Right, and so I don't think we can stress enough the importance for merchants to make sure if you're not already speaking to a good 3DS provider, do so now, especially, let's say, as the European regulation pertains, to make sure you're going to be set up in the most appropriate way for your business.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which leads us to PSD2. So there's a couple of dates there, December 31st and then March 14th, basically just over a month or a year from now. So what's the significance of both of these dates?
Yeah, so the first date, December 31st, 2020, that is the overall EBA stance and expectation of migrating e-commerce transactions and adhering to the PSD2 SCA law and implementation in the European market. So, this is the date that everybody's ticking towards. Again, it shows 9 months, so we've got just a little over the 9 months, with this being the start of March, in getting to this date. The secondary one, and as we know, the UK is a little bit different. The UK Financial Authority, or the FCA, or Financial Conduct Authority, my apologies, has actually extended that date till March 14th, 2021. So they have a little bit more time, and it is kind of almost where the majority of transactions, reside, but it's still working towards those dates. If you're acquired in Europe, then, this March 14th date might be a little bit more geared towards you. But if you have acquiring relationships in other EEA countries, then you're really going to want to work towards that December 31st date and just make sure that you're covered across the board, There are some different countries, France, I think, might play out to the March 14th date as well. But, it's all still up in the air. So the good date to think about is that December 31st date.
Yeah.
And of course, that's right in peak holiday season, right? Like, nobody thinks about that when laws and extensions are going into place. So really, this is trying to get yourself ready for September, before that holiday peak really kicks in.
Absolutely. And especially, I think, for, as you said, there's a lot of things to take into account. And really, it's in the merchant's interest to test this out, make sure that the solution is optimized.
Yeah.
And of course, in Europe, typically the month of August might be vacation month. So,
well, you would know better than
well, I would. So in essence, stressing the point that really merchants should be now talking about this with their 3DS provider, or with a potential 3DS provider.
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot of potential use cases that come into effect, and as you mentioned, if a merchant is operating in different countries within Europe, there's potentially 2 different timelines, but it's really in their interest to make sure they're ready for that December 31st end of story.
Yeah, absolutely. And make sure that you're looking at a provider that, supports you globally, so that, once you've got your set integration and solution ready to go, it's just a matter of, are you going to send those transactions to your provider? So you can also control those on-off dates as well.
And a lot of the devil is in the detail, isn't it? And especially as the protocol is concerned, you had mentioned the possibility, the potential of some exemptions. And again, that's quite nuanced. So having those in-depth discussions now, I don't think we can stress enough the importance.
Talk to your acquirer. They can, if you're a merchant, talk to your acquirer. They can offer you guidance. Your 3D Secure provider can offer you guidance as well. Different card networks do take different approaches on, what to send to authorization first versus what to send to authentication first. So there's definitely differences that you need to be aware of.
Right. So we very likely touched on this new protocol, EMV 3D Secure. And you had already mentioned there's version 2.1 currently in effect, and version 2.2 is coming into effect. At a more holistic level, if a merchant is not very clear about this new protocol, but might have some experience with the existing old 3DS 1.0 version, what are the key differences?
Yeah, so I kind of key those into 4 different buckets. We showed a little bit differently visually here. But the first is, consumer experience. So long gone are the days of activation during shopping. You don't have static PIN or passwords as your authentication challenge method. Risk-based authentication is, coming into play as a requirement from the card networks. So it's no longer, step up every single transaction. They actually have some compliance rules for issuers in regards to the amount that a transaction or amount of total transactions that can be stepped up. From a merchant perspective as well, it's, hey, send more transactions. It's not just about sending high-risk transactions anymore and trying to get that fraud liability shift and work in the system a little bit. It's about making sure that my bucket number 2, expanded data set, that 135 plus required, conditionally required, and optional fields are sent into the issuer. Yes, issuers haven't seen this information before, but yes, in 1999, it was a browser and we were just starting to make purchases online. So much has advanced in technology over the time frame, and those systems weren't built for card not present transactions. So the more data that you send down the rails, the better the issuer's decisioning factors are going to be in the long run. And hopefully, that's then exchanged and shared with the authorization. If you approved an authentication and, applied risk-based authentication and it was a low-risk transaction, then you should be approving that online transaction as well in authorization. So that's where we get into the gap disparity between card present and card not present. Device. So device agnostic for EMV 3DS, 3DS 1 was made for browser transactions. And again, we barely had applications on our phone. We didn't have smartphones when the original protocol was rolled out. So much has happened over the past, 20 years that we've got to get up with the times, and the protocol is meeting those times today. So, if you are a merchant who has a native application, then of course you're going to do the SDK integration as well, so that you can authenticate within those native applications and get those transactions running. And then of course, becoming regulatory smart and just meeting the 2FA, two-factor authentication, or the SCA, strong customer authentication requests and mandates that are popping up around the world. So becoming a little bit more flexible, the ability to ask an issuer to step up if you deem it as a merchant as risky, the ability to ask them to step up because of a mandate, or even, don't step up because of an exemption request for PSD2 in Europe. So a lot more flexibility coming down.
Right, and even from the merchant's perspective as well.
Most
correct,
definitely.
And I suppose, yes, there's already the new generation of 3D Secure EMV 3DS has come out, and we're already talking about different versions. But that's a good thing, because I think it highlights that this new EMV 3DS is really going to keep up with the ecosystem as it evolves.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I encourage merchants and issuers to start now on Q1. Q2 is for Europe. That doesn't necessarily mean that the U.S. market right now needs to be Q2 compatible. Yeah. But you can have that Q2 compatibility in the U.S. because when the time is right, where the networks will come in and say, hey, we're going to allow trusted beneficiaries or whitelisting for a global acceptance, then you'll be ready and you'll support that. There's whispers out there about 2.3, and 2.3 is for virtual SDKs. It is not for the mass majority. It is for the tier of the tier and the cream of the crop that have their own operating systems, and with that comes added cost. So, it's not just about, I'm going to wait till 2.5 is out, or I'm going to wait till this. Do it now, and then the more that time goes on and as versions roll out, if it's right for you and the feature and benefits that are available in those versions are right for you, then you can do that incremental work so that your payment stack and your authentication stack is always present and always together for just the features and benefits that you want to use.
Yeah.
Or that's available in your market.
Okay, so some very good points there. And I think underlying all of that is that the importance to make sure you're talking to a good 3DS provider today. And they will then certainly be able to advise you best what suits your business. Yeah. Okay, so really, I suppose, just summarizing that, as we had just said, it's important for merchants to talk to a 3DS provider to determine what are the next steps that you should do. And just as you were discussing there, Maggie, well, what version? Potentially there's confusion about what version, 2.1, 2.2. I think you summarized it nicely there. Of course, essential to understand if your business falls within a mandated region or if part of your business falls within a mandated region. Again, you can consult the web address that I shared earlier on that gives an overview of the regional mandates, or discuss with your 3DS provider. Without repeating ourselves too much, I think the final point here is that especially for those merchants who are in the U.S. who have in Europe who have European acquired business, critical that you need to make sure you're preparing for that mandate. Yeah. That is going to come into effect.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so I think now might be a good time to address any questions that our listeners are sharing with us. So I think there's one question that's come in here. Is fraud liability protection a shift in liability for
Carte Bancaire?
For Carte Bancaire with fraud reason codes. So is fraud liability protection shift in liability for Carte Bancaire with fraud reason codes?
Yeah, so CB actually does have a matrix of fraud liability shift attached to it, and simply put, they do provide fraud liability shift on authenticated and attempt transactions, unless a merchant actually asks no challenge. So if a merchant is going to say, and there's a field in EMV 3DS called 3DS Challenge Indicator.
Right.
It has different values in it. 1 through 4 is currently in 2.1 spec. That means it means no preference, challenge, no challenge, or challenge because of mandate. 5 through, I think, 9 is 2.2, and that's PSD2 exemptions. But if a merchant were to ask one of the CB issuers, hey, please do not challenge this transaction, and the issuer chooses not to challenge, then they're going to not have fraud liability shift on that transaction.
Okay.
So basically, if you let the issuer do what they want to do, and make that choice themselves, then you're going to have fraud liability shift on your authenticated and attempts transactions.
Sure. Okay, we have another question. How long will version 1.0 be supported in the U.S.? And maybe I'd add to that, even on a broader global basis, do we have any information at hand yet?
We have one. I think the card networks are always evaluating this. What's important for the rest of the ecosystem to understand, and maybe some of our attendants, is that the networks, as well as ACS providers, 3DS servers, we're all supporting 2 protocols right now, right? And that's going to be some time. But that's costly and that's expensive, especially from a network perspective, because they not only have a 3DS 1.0 directory server, but now they're standing up a secondary directory server to support EMV 3DS. And they have to support those in parallel. So right now, the only quasi-announcement that we have is MasterCard does plan at this point to sunset Secure Code, or 3DS 1, come December 31st of this year. So if you have not shifted, then that means that you try to send a 1.0 transaction, that's not going to now be supported. Now, this date does align with other dates that they have put out there in the market. We did talk earlier about their December 31st, 2019 date, where all merchants, acquirers, and issuers were supposed to shift to support EMV 3DS. So they're basically giving everybody a year to say, hey, get on EMV 3DS if you didn't by December of 2019. After that, it might be no support whatsoever. And, the markets are always, the different networks are always evaluating, are they still, or when will they support 3DS 1.0.2 anymore? We just don't have those answers as of yet, but they will be announced. Cardinal will tell their clients. It will be on our demo site once those announcements have been made.
Okay. Another question just coming in. Outside of the EU or Europe, what are the other countries or regions where SCA or two-factor authentication is being mandated or in process?
Yeah. So I think the most apparent outside of Europe is India. India has had 2FA requirements probably since around 2007. The RBI had stepped in as a government entity and has said, fraud is out of control. We definitely want to control this in an online environment, and you must authenticate every single transaction that's e-com or remote. They have had a little bit of relax in the past couple of years. I think 2015-ish, 2016 was where they relaxed to anything under 2,000 rupees was no longer requiring 2FA. You also have a list of countries where the networks have kind of stepped in. Visa said, hey, Australia, hey, New Zealand. They really wanted them to be active ahead of the AP market, and that was for April of 2019.
Right.
And you see that shift there, definitely supporting that. So we do have, you mentioned, our demos.cardinalcommerce.com website.
Yes.
Under the 3D Secure app on the homepage, then you can click that button and go to our mandate page as well. And there's a little bit more information. Whether you hover, you'll get a slight snapshot.
Yeah.
If you click on it, you'll get the full more detail.
Yeah.
Or there's the list view that'll give you the full detail as well. So that's a resource for our participants today.
Okay, and just to highlight that, I believe that demo site is actually listed in the resources section on the webinar screen here. And I suppose just to stress that it's as I mentioned at the beginning, it's dynamic, it's evolving. So what's in place today as far as mandates and regulations are concerned could certainly change in the future. So it's something that merchants need to really keep an eye on a regular basis, especially those merchants who are operating in different regions.
1 second. Can you go to...
It looks like we have another question.
Oh, great. We've got a live update from MasterCard. So we do have that they will announce out dates in the summer of this year about 3DS One support, but it will not be retiring as of December 2020. So just a correction to that.
This is hot off the press.
Yes, I love it. So thanks so much for that, Bob. We appreciate that. Looks like we got another question.
Yeah, so are there guidelines from Visa and other card brands that require issuers to meet certain approval rates year on year?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, do these differ for the different versions of 3D Secure?
Yeah, so what I'll say, this is a public webinar, and, each of the EMV 3DS, whether it be 3DS 1.0.2 or EMV 3DS program rules, they're behind portal systems. So whether that's Visa Online, whether that's MasterCard Connect, you should access those. If you're a client of Cardinal, then we can definitely review the differences and the KPIs that are required per card network, but I just don't think that this is a format to discuss that information. So just get in touch with us after the webinar.
Okay, so very good. Just seeing if there's any other significant questions. So I think to summarize, there's a lot going on. Maggie, certainly appreciate all the information you were able to share, and I think in a very clear manner. This information, of course, is public-facing. It's evolving. So again, keep in constant, regular contact with your 3DS provider. To make sure that you're in the loop. I would like to mention that our next webinar will be in late April. Date is yet to be confirmed, but look out for details on that. And with that, thanks again, Maggie, for joining, and we very much appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course. Pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So thank you all for joining the webinar, and look forward to talking to you again soon.